gentlemen, all good evening. Once again, thank you for having me here and being able to present this little presentation I put together, which I've been working on. This is kind of grew out of the Underground Railroad. As I started working on that, I started seeing certain particular items and events dealing with the modern civil rights, which I'm going to talk about. But I wanted to talk about this, and it's getting bigger. It's getting better. I'm adding more to it as I'm trying to formulate it all together. But this was something I came up with, and it's not just about Masons, men who were heavily involved in a particular good cause who just happen to be Masons. But I usually like to talk, like in the Underground Railroad, I like to talk about what Freemasonry actually did. That the craft was used, the lodges were used, the men were organizing, they were organizing themselves as Masons, they were organizing as lodges and Grand Lodges. So I don't like to stereotype and say, well, Buzz Aldrin went to the moon and, well, he would happen to be a Mason. But, these are individuals who really, really took the craft to that level and put the craft on the forefront in the line. And it's very interesting to see some of the tidbits that I will talk about. Now, throughout modern times, especially since our revolution, many of the world's revolutions around the world have been formulated and instituted and organized and led by Freemasons. And now many of these individuals are not just your poster child Freemason. John Wayne was a Freemason, but how much Freemason did he actually do? And that's sometimes the stereotype that Masons have. We like to tag people, but I like to tag those who used the craft, who benefited from the craft, who actually took the principles of our craft and took it to that next level. Now, many of these individuals were inspired by our own revolution here. Many of them came to sort and discuss and seek the advice of a lot of these revolutionists, including Francisco de Miranda, who led the first revolt in Venezuela. He became a Freemason in England, and he actually had communications with the president here in the United States, who was a Freemason. He came to New Jersey, he came to New York. He sought the counsel and fellowship of the brother Masons to assist him in organizing this revolution that he was trying to spur in Venezuela. It failed, but the next one with Simón Bolívar liberated South America. So again, we see these individuals taking the craft to that level. Now this next slide, everybody here on this slide, with the exception of Dr. Martin Luther King, was a Freemason. Lyndon Baines Johnson, from what I've heard, was an entered-apprentice Mason. He never completed his Masonic career because he was thrown into politics. But nonetheless, he was a brother Mason, not a Master Mason, but a brother Mason. But everybody else here was a Freemason, was an active Freemason, not just come every once in a while or join and never came back. But and that's another interesting. We lay a lot of claim to George Washington, but believe it or not, George Washington is only known to have attended 9 meetings in his entire life. Now he's a great individual and did a lot for this nation, and he's the poster boy of Masonry here in the United States. But again, how much Masonry did he actually do? Only attending 9 meetings in the entire life, not counting the 3 degrees that he took to become a Master Mason. So again, these individuals each had a hand somehow, some way, with their fraternity, with the craft, with the brethren, whether it was organizing ritual, organizing orders, organizing leaders, marrying the different churches, AME Church with Prince Hall Freemasonry. So we see something very unique here that had never been done before. Now, there are major periods through the United States, all of which had individuals who were standing up for civil liberties, for civil rights, for ending of slavery, for the right to vote, all in different periods. So we had them in the Revolutionary War. We had them during the Underground Railroad, which was about the 1820s, just through the Civil War. We had the Reconstruction period, which is a lot of times forgotten about, which is the years after the Civil War, where many leaders and many African Americans took the lead. Next step was to grant rights to vote, and many of them actually got elected into offices, especially elected offices in Congress, in local and state communities down south. The Jim Crow years came during the 1900s, and this was instituted in the South, and this was a way of enforcing the segregation, which kind of grew up again in the South. Then we come up to the Civil Rights era, which was during the 40s, 50s, and during the 60s, leading up to the signing of the Civil Rights. And up until the present day, as we see today, we still have many, many issues to deal with here. Now, there are three significant points in this whole time span, or at least from the Civil War on down. The 13th Amendment, which granted the right of all men, ending slavery. The 15th Amendment granted the right of all men, the right to vote. Not all ladies. All ladies didn't get that vote till 1920, the 19th Amendment. So we're talking 50 years later. And then the Civil Rights Act, which was signed, by Lyndon Baines Johnson in 1964-65, as we see those rights ending segregation down south. And people always ask me, what's the difference? Well, they had their freedom, or what's the difference from civil rights? Well, the civil right ended segregation, so you didn't have to sit in the back of the bus. You didn't have to use a colored restroom. You didn't have to drink out of a colored water fountain. You didn't have to go to a segregated school. Now, another individual came up to me, Mo, and said, Mo, would they feel different? I mean, if they had their own school and we had our own school, what difference does it make, whether they were integrated or not? Well, the problem was that a lot of times the schools for coloreds or African Americans here during that time weren't up to par. The monies weren't allocated right, especially down in the South during the Civil War period, during the Underground Railroad period, even the Reconstruction period. You see maybe a small community with maybe just one building or a church that was used during the day for school, and all grades will be included. So you can have grades 1 through middle school and maybe high school incorporated with maybe 1 or 2 teachers, where a school in a white neighborhood might have a grammar school, a middle school, and a high school. So this was a way of ending that. So even though, okay, you might say they had their own school, but it wasn't up to par, and they didn't get the right allocation, they didn't have the right funds, they didn't have the right monies. It was much more difficult. This kind of, paved the way to make it even across the board. Now, in my estimation and what I've done, Prince Hall is probably hands down the first civil rights activist, leader, you name it, whatever you want to tag him, he was the very first. I mean, he started in the late 1700s. He urged his brethren to educate themselves and to promote civil liberties of his people by way of the craft. He was one of the first to advocate for civil rights. This organization stood against discriminatory treatment, slavery, and racism. Now, he instructed his brethren and the craft and those who were coming in. He used the craft and instructed them to educate, to teach, to be a voice, to be an advocacy, especially for those newly freed slaves that were coming up north and didn't have quite a path, weren't educated, didn't know how to read, how to write, which is another way to keep people down. And he instituted this. He was a beacon for those who were impoverished or enslaved can now be free and come up here and say, well, where did this man come from? How did you speak this way? How are you so eloquent? How do you know how to write? How do you know how to read? This was a beacon. And when you see these men dressed up nicely, attending lodge, having this camaraderie, this fellowship, this transmits out. It infects those others, say, I want a slice of that. And he, instead of keeping it secret, he wanted his brethren to go out and let them know that, hey, this is what Freemasonry does. This is what we're doing. We're being a voice. We're being an advocate. We're doing peacefully, but we're going to stand up against, against civil rights. We're going to stand up against slavery. We're going to stand up against the injustices that are being done. And of course, the greatest injustice is that as he's fighting for the American Revolution, he becomes a Freemason in the Irish Military Lodge and then can't have fellowship after the war. So for the very reason he's fighting for and is willing to spill his blood and give his life, because he's thinking at the end, if we win, things will be much better. And it turned out to be worse, forcing him to ask Grand Master of England for a charter. Now, sometimes I say out of something bad comes something good, because just like my family came from Cuba, if what happened in Cuba didn't happen, I wouldn't have the opportunities I would have had here. I probably would have been born, raised, and died in Cuba. So sometimes out of something good, something bad, something good comes out. All the good that Prince Hall has done throughout the ages might not have never happened, or not to say it could happen later on by somebody else, but if he would have been accepted and just would have mingled and just assimilated, we never would have known about this. We would never have heard about Prince Hall Freemasonry. So sometimes out of something bad, something good comes out. And this was for the best. And look what they have done throughout over 200 years since their inception. Now, in 1829, David Walker publishes the Walker's Appeal for the purpose of encouraging readers to take an active role in fighting their oppression, regardless of the risk, and to press Americans to realize the moral and religious failure of slavery. Now, he was a very eloquent speaker. He was a great orator. He would write great pamphlets, kind of like Thomas Paine with Common Sense. And this was a motivational for many of those who were enslaved, many abolitionists, but most particularly because he was a Freemason, he also advocated this within the Masonic halls and the Masonic temple. So these words that he spoke, this adamant, his feelings, his passion was disseminated in lodges and amongst the brethren. So he used the brethren and, of course, followed the mantra what Prince Hall had said from the beginning, that we are here to do more than just come, meet, socialize, discuss, and go home. We need to take this further. And this was just slow stepping stones that Prince Hall progressed eventually as we know it today. Now, a very unique thing happened. Richard Allen on the left and Epsilon Jones on the right, they were Methodist preachers. And they were having a tough time preaching to white congregations. So there was a little bit of animosity there, even though they were in the North, in Philadelphia. They decided to break away and create the Mother Bethel African Methodist Episcopal Church. And to this day, it is the largest African-American denominational church in the world. They're large in the United States and around the world in many countries, including down in South Africa and in many parts of the world. Now, they were also friends and became Masons through Prince Hall. And they asked Prince Hall for a charter in Philadelphia. And what they did was they took it a step further. They married the church together with Freemasonry. And to this day, there is a 200-year history of AME Church being leaders in the forefront of the civil rights movement, anti-slavery movement, as well as Prince Hall Freemasonry. Wherever one went, the other one went behind it. If Prince Hall got there first, AME Church came with it. They were inseparable together, and to this day they still have an incredible bond and union, which is very rare. We know in the Muslim world, for the most part, most of those countries are not allowed to have masonry. The few that do have to be secretly underground, really secret. And as a Catholic myself, the papal bull banned Catholics from becoming Freemasons. So it's very rare to see a church, especially a denominational church, take such a marriage and a stance along with Freemasonry. And there's never been a union of religion, of a religious organization with Freemasonry as we see here with these two. So much so that when Most Worshipful Brother Thomas W. Springer, who was a past Grand Master of the National Grand Lodge and was bringing Prince Hall or Freemasonry throughout states in the South, in the 1840s, as a members of St. John's AME Church in New Orleans, we see a church petition to organize a Masonic lodge. This was approved in 1849 when Richmond Lodge No. 4 was created under the guidance of Thomas W. Springer, who was also a member of this church, who was also a great leader of this church. But here we see not brethren coming together from other lodges, but we see a church petitioning Prince Hall Grand Lodge and saying, hey, we have several brothers here. We want to have a petition for a lodge here. And to this day, that was what we now know as the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Louisiana, which grew into what it is today, who were really, really big advocates during the civil rights movement. Now, in the early beginnings of the 1900s, we see that Niagara movement, which was started in 1907. Many of the leaders that were there were also Freemasons. It kind of fizzled out, and then it gave rise. Once again, they tried to restart it, but this time they created the NAACP, which was created in 1909, with many of its significant leaders being Freemasons themselves. Mm-hmm. Now, Prince Hall Lodges went on to subsidize the NAACP for education, financial assistance, healthcare, funeral expenses. Many mutual benefit societies were created, such as the New England Masonic Relief Association, the Hiram Masonic Relief Association, and many even founded their own banks to provide people of color at that time, African Americans, the opportunities to have loans, to buy businesses, to buy homes. But by far, one of the earliest links between these two organizations was an agreement signed by Thurgood Marshall in 1951, who was the lead counsel for the NAACP and fought many, many battles in courts in the South, with Prince Hall Grand Lodge. The Prince Hall Masonic Legal Research Fund meant to support the NAACP struggle for civil rights. This was one of the leading financial supports that the NAACP received during those hard times in the 50s and 60s when the struggles were really rough. And the bulk of it was being paid for and being fronted by this legal research fund, which was created by a compact, an agreement signed between the Grand Lodges, the Prince Hall Masonic Lodges, and the NAACP through Thurgood Marshall, who eventually became our first African-American Supreme Court Justice, I believe in 1969. And at that time was the legal counsel of the NAACP. So again, it's not just that Thurgood Marshall was a Mason, but that these individuals married that union. They incorporated Masonic lives as a beacon, as a lead struggle for these movements in those early years. Now in Georgia, we see Most Worshipful John Wesley Dobbs. He arranged for gatherings of Freemasons at Big Bethel AME Church. Again, the marriage between the church and Freemasonry, the union between the two, because he knew that the power of Freemasonry in politics could be used properly to motivate for the civil rights purpose. He realized the importance of voter registration and emphasized it in Masonic halls. Now, in the Grand Lodge temples, in particular the one in Atlanta, that was used many, many times for voter registration. It was used many times for balloting place. It was a place of safe haven. It was a place of security. And it was a beacon for the civil rights movement. Now, just about every state in the South, if you go from Georgia all the way across, Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, if you go all the way across, all of the most important civil rights organizations, NAACP, CORE, Southern Christian Leadership Conference, all of them always had their head offices in the Masonic temples or the Grand Lodge temples of those respected states because of the importance that Freemasonry played, the struggles that they took part in, some of the rallies that they organized, some of the funds that they organized. So it was important for them to realize that not only were many of these leaders Freemasons themselves, but they felt that it was so important to have these offices in these Grand Lodge temples, not only for safety and security, but they felt a kinship between the two together, fighting for that same cause, which was really created and started by Prince Hall back in the 1700s. Now, here in New York City on February 15th in 1964, there was a Freedom Now rally, which was held in New York City, mobilized by the Grand Lodge of Prince Hall Masons of New York. This was a partial implementation of a solemn pledge taken at the Lincoln Memorial in D.C. at the historic 1963 march and speech given by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And this was, again, solely 100% organized by the Masons of New York to come together and to have this rally and to pledge not to forget those words that were spoken there, and that we all leave and forget what was done and we all go back to our normal business, but to continue that theme, to continue that spirit, to continue those pledges, to continue that cause and that march. So it's very, and this was advocate. This was in widely advertised. It was a public event, so it wasn't something done in secret or hiding, as some of the organizations before the Civil War, because of the hostilities or the dangers they were committing. Underground Railroad movement had to be secret. Masons involved had to keep it secret because lives were at stake, including their own. So things were much different then. But here we see Masonry again continuing that strand and continuing that application and engaging. But now we see it on a public scale, like we've never seen it before. Now, these two leaders are probably the two biggest leaders of the modern civil rights movement, Medgar Evers on the left and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on the right. Now, Medgar Evers was very active Freemason in Mississippi. He was the secretary of the NAACP offices for Mississippi, and he decided to have his offices in the Jackson, Mississippi Grand Lodge Temple. Martin Luther King did the same, although he was not a Freemason. His fathers and uncles and many of his family heritage belonged in Freemasonry, were Freemasons. And he again decided that he was going to have his Southern Christian Leadership Conference movement, which was the biggest civil rights movement in that time. And he was going to have it in the offices of the Grand Lodge Temple in Georgia, in Atlanta, not far from where he was born, not far from where the Ebenezer Baptist Church is, not far from where he's buried today. So again, we're seeing the interactive of some of these major leaders. Now in the Jackson, Mississippi, every single civil rights group had their offices in that building, specifically in that building, because of the importance and the significance they played, that Prince Hall Freemasonry or Freemasonry in general played in that part. Now it's an interesting story. In January of 2018, President Trump was flying to Atlanta, and I believe it was King's daughter and niece, Alveda, that were on Air Force One. He was attending some sort of event in Atlanta, and on the way down, he signed the first Martin Luther King historical site there, which was always claimed as historical site, but he signed into law the first ever National Historical Park in Georgia. So the MLK went from historical site to now a national park. It's the highest designation we can give a particular area or a building or a battlefield. It's now equal to the Statue of Liberty, to Gettysburg, to Yosemite, to Yellowstone. It's the highest level you can afford. But the individuals that put this together, including Representative John Lewis, Freemason himself, many of these individuals who drafted this bill for it to be signed, which was passed and signed by the president, decided to add something extra in it. So what they did was they took the historical site as it was, and they decided to just transfer it and make it a national park, with one exception. They decided to increase the boundary just by 1 block. And if you happen to look at a before and after map, which you can Google it, you'll see that the before and after incorporates 1 square block, and now the Prince Hall Grand Lodge Temple in Atlanta, Georgia, is now inside this. So the boundaries were added just enough to go around that building to incorporate that building into the National Park as we know it today. To my knowledge, it's the only Masonic temple inside of a national park in the United States. And it was done so because of the significance that the Masons played during the Civil Rights era. Now, of course, these are the modern times. This is what we most remember. But again, they have played a role all throughout the over 200 years that they've been in existence. So it was very unique that most people don't even realize that, but it was Masons behind the scene that decided to add that little tidbit in there and just expand the boundaries enough to incorporate that Masonic temple because of the importance they realized of how important that temple was, and that some of the greatest attributes that we have today leading up to the signing of civil rights came from that office there and that building there. So, and up until a few years ago, it was actually still the headquarters, and they actually moved to a new building on their own a few blocks down the road. But nevertheless, it showed the significance of the two together. Now, there is an interesting story, which I had no idea until I actually was reading upon it by sheer accident. Now, we all know that Rosa Parks made the great bus boycott movement in 1955. She decided to sit in the white section. She refused to move. She was forcibly dragged off the bus, nearly thrown off the bus, out the door, arrested, charged, tried, because she was trying to make a stance. However, again, and this is sometimes a fault of ourselves because we don't, we advocate and we don't advocate what we actually have done as Freemasons. But 2 years before, in 1953, 2 Grand Masters, one from Louisiana, one from Georgia, John J. Lewis Jr. from Louisiana and Wesley Dobbs from Georgia, decided that they were going to do a bus boycott 2 years before Rosa Parks ever decided to sit in the white section. And this was done because in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, again, the rules were colored section in the back, white section in the front. And if the white section was empty and there was no colored seats, you had to wait for the next bus. You were not allowed to sit regardless, even if it was empty. Even if it was in a black neighborhood, you were not allowed to sit. But the powers that be created a civil ordinance in the city of Baton Rouge that allowed and changed the rules a little bit so that you can, if the color section was filled, you can migrate forward and sit in the white section, providing you started from the back to the front. However, the bus drivers weren't enforcing it. Local and civil leaders and law enforcement were not enforcing it, and many were not allowed to do this. So the Masons got highly upset about this, and these 2 Grand Masters decided to put their powers to play. They went to Thurgood Marshall, who was again the lead counsel for the NAACP, and they decided to tell him that we're going to formalize a bus boycott. And not only that, but we're going to raise money, each giving $6,500 and $6,000 respectively to him for legal funds. But not only that, they also paid for cabs. So if you were going to work or going to school or going shopping, what they were saying is, don't ride the bus, take a cab, we'll pay for it, or we have brother Masons at certain locations with their cars, and they'll drive you anywhere, and we'll pay for their fuel. And this actually diminished the funds that the bus companies were expecting to get. And what happened was that they actually had to not change the laws because it was already in effect, but start enforcing the law and saying, okay, we're going to allow these individuals to sit and enforce this rule. So here we see 2 years before that, we see an organization, Freemasons, taking the lead, not behind the scenes, not in secretive, but here organizing the first bus boycott ever to prove that segregation was wrong and that the fact that this ordinance was put into place and wasn't being enforced. And this was organized completely by those individuals and those Freemasons from those two states, and effectively made change in that state and in that city. So again, we see Freemasonry taking the front lead of this organization, even a step above the NAACP, because they went to them to say, this is what we're going to do. We want to support you. We want you to back us up, and we're going to pay for any legal fees. We're going to pay for cabs. We're going to pay for fuel or gasoline for these brethren to be transported. So it's very, very important to see how this actually took place. Now, leaving here, again, this is not just here in the United States, but around the world. We see that Masonry has always taken a forefront, and not just here, but all around the world. Now, South Africa, we all know that had the ruling party was the National Party, which was apartheid, which was horrible. If you think things were bad here, well, it was 100 times worse in South Africa. And when they won their general election in 1948, they kind of became what they were. The National Party took over and created what was now we know as apartheid. And they quickly formed many quick laws to separate races. Now, they were equally as hard on themselves, on white people, as they were on black people. The Prohibition of Mixed Marriages Act of 1945 banned the mixes or marriages of mixed races. Now, even if you were a white person, you could be thrown in jail or banned as well. The Group Areas Act was also enacted so that if you wanted to congregate or meet, you had to be separated. The Reservation of Separate Amenities Act was kind of how segregation was in the South. You had to have certain sections for people of color, for white people, whether it be a restaurant, whether it be a bus. They forcibly made sure that everything was separated. You couldn't even meet on the same bus. You had to have separate lines, separate buses. But the worst was banning. And banning was something that was put into place. And this was if you were inciting insurrection, if you were verbally speaking seditious, or what they claimed as seditious acts or seditious of speaking against the country, you could be banned, white or black. If you were banned for 5 years, which means you could not have a meeting with only one person. You could not meet with any more than just one person at a time within that country. You could not attend certain rallies. You could not attend certain sporting events. And if you were banned, you were constantly watched, whether it be in front of your house, whether it be at work. And if you were caught violating that, you were sent to jail. You were sent to prison. Usually, Robben Island is where most of them went, where Nelson Mandela went. But something unique happened. Now, the Grand Lodge of South Africa was organized in 51, and they elected their first line officers in 61. But Prince Hall Freemasonry had always been there, as well as Scottish, Irish, and English constitutional lodges. They were all there as well. Prince Hall Freemasonry was established in South Africa, again, by the African Methodist Episcopal Church, Bishop Copeland from Philadelphia, where the mother church was organized. In 1902, Ethiopia Lodge number 75 and Copeland Lodge number 76 were chartered by Prince Hall Lodge, the Grand Lodge in Philadelphia, but restricted to colors only, as the white was restricted to whites only. Now, something unique happened. In 1973, members of both sides started to communicate to each other and talk to each other, and how they can start to actually treat and meet themselves as Masons. How can we do this? Now, there was laws in those countries that forbade you from meeting. You could not have meetings with white and black. You could not meet together with white and black. It was against the law, and either side could be punished. So again, we see this organization defying the rules and the laws of the land, but this played out for several years. It went up to the highest levels of government. Many Freemasons in those positions actually helped, including the wives of some of the leading members of Freemasonry and government, who actually were meeting secretly to pass messages across to each other. And Prince Hall Freemasonry wanted not just to be recognized, not just to be a dual member, but to be accepted as equal. Both parties decided that we're going to become one. So in an unprecedented move, the Prince Hall Masons decided to give up their charter, send it back to Philadelphia. We're giving up all Freemasonry, and we're going to start from scratch, but we're going to do it in a white lodge. And they petitioned the White Lodge, and the two men first came in. They went through all 3 degrees, becoming full, bona fide dual members of that organization and that fraternity. Not dual members. They weren't recognized. They felt that the only way to break it, to break this apartheid, was to actually start from within, infiltrate from within, show that it can be done on this level. If you're recognized as a Freemason, okay, I can recognize you, but if we still don't meet, then what's the purpose? It still defies that. And in 1977, this organization, Freemasonry in South Africa, after going back and forth between government, between lodges, between grand lodges, decided that they were going to break ties and they were going to admit men of color for the first time during the greatest, darkest periods of apartheid. In 77, Stephen Biko was murdered. Mandela was still in prison in Robben Island, as well as many other advocates and leaders that were speaking out. And we see this happening at that particular moment in time. And it wasn't done in secrecy, because when it was actually done, it was actually published in newspapers. They actually published that not only are we accepting men of color into white mainstream lodges, but we're also going to break the law, because the law of South Africa forbade this from happening. But it was the powers that be, Masons, who turned a blind eye and said, okay, this is, in my estimation, this is a quiet, slow way of beginning to chisel away and bring that wall of apartheid down. And I believe that Freemasonry, there's no doubt about it, this was the first integration. This was never been done before. No other organization had done this before. None of them even dared tried before. But here we see Freemasonry taking a stance the first time to go against apartheid. And this small action, I believe, led that ball rolling downhill, growing eventually bigger, eventually leading to the ending of apartheid, opening up of the country, electing Nelson Mandela as his first black president of that nation. And again, Freemasonry at the forefront, taking the stance as leaders and saying, hey, we don't want to be recognized. We don't want to be dual. We want to be equal. And you're going to take us in the lodge. You're going to make us Masons, and we're going to fight that cause from within. And the laws of the country were not changed. They were just given a blind eye, and they were given permission to do so. And it's unbelievable that in those times, in that heat of that moment, heat of that period, that Freemasonry was able to make and affect that small change. And remember, change comes in small steps. Take that one step, it leads to a bigger step, and eventually the ending of apartheid. Freemasonry America, in particular, Prince Hall Masons, have improved the social status of African Americans by promoting their rights. First against slavery, then the right to vote, and finally the civil rights. Now, brethren, never lose sight of the struggles. Continue on the path of righteousness, and never be swayed from your duty and obligation. Remember, it is in the temples that reside in each one of us where change must occur first, before we can change the world. Now, brethren, as Freemasons, we should hold ourselves to a higher standard and strive to live up to the tenets of our craft. Changing the hearts and minds of many, even the one, by the power of education and enlightenment, is paramount. Brethren, I know I can't change the world, but if I can change one person, I've done my duty for humanity, and I've done my duty as a Freemason. Wherever I go, whatever I do, this is what I now preach to everybody I speak to, Masons or non-Masons alike. As Freemasons, we must always try to do what is right. However, it takes courage on our part to change people's hearts. Try to be that voice, that spark, that advocacy for those who cannot speak for themselves. When we look back from time immemorial, all the way down to the present day, many of these Freemasons who were willing to give up their way of life, their fortunes, and in some cases their lives, for the benefit of others or that cause, at great peril and loss to themselves and to those around them. Yet they were willing to do so because they fought and believed in something bigger than themselves. And they realized that this was for the greater good of all mankind. I believe the spark that started and ignited our own revolution here in America was inspired by the cause of freedom and liberty for all. Freemasonry represented, for many of them, those same resounding principles. Our institution, which goes back many centuries, proclaiming its most valued principle of allowing its members to meet together as men, regardless of their color, their faith, their culture, or their creed. We each seek our own paths in Freemasonry, and we don't all come in the same way and manner. But that's what makes Freemasonry so unique. We each add our own distinct uniqueness to the craft. Respect and toleration must remain the order of the day. I may not agree with a brother, I may not even like him, but I have to respect him. And when we enter the lodge, we are all equal and meeting on the level. That's the true spirit of Freemasonry, and I believe that is the greatest core value that our fraternity has to offer today. At the closing charge of a lodge, the worship master will say, "Do good unto all, especially those of the household of faith." Everyone deserves a good claim upon your kind offerings. And I believe that these words are spoken because of how we meet, act, and part. We come into a lodge and we respect each other, we speak to each other, we enlighten each other, and then we leave lodge in fellowship, never breaking that chain of union. This is the message I hope you all take with you from this lecture. Do good always and spread that light which through our labors shines within each and every one of us. And when you close that lodge room door and depart company, don't leave the bonds which unite us in brotherly love behind. Take it with you and let the world know and see that the greatest beauty and treasure we have is not our ancient antiquities. It's not a relic or parchment. It's not even the beauties of our magnificent temples, but instead let them see us for who we really are. That men can meet in the bonds of fellowship without butchering one another. We're only here because of those who have gone in the past before us have paved the way for us to be here today. And we have to continue those struggles borne by so many. Imagine the struggles that many Freemasons went through so that we can have our freedoms and meet today as free men and Freemasons. As a fraternity, we're still suffering from the ill effects of slavery, racism, bigotry, segregation, and injustices. It's a systematic problem, or systemic problem, which in many places, even within our humble craft, prevents men from meeting and respecting each other as equals. The real beauties of Freemasonry is that we all do it differently. We each add our own collective thought and uniqueness. That we are different but connected by a common thread of fellowship, brotherly love, and fraternal bonds. It is in the hearts of men coming together under the umbrella of the great architect of the universe, bonded by these eternal words: respect, toleration, truth, equality, compassion, and diversity. Brethren, Freemasonry is a way of life. We choose this life of our own free will and accord. And in return, we follow the tenets and principles of our craft, which leads to character, righteousness, and truth. Freemasonry is not suitable for a person's chosen faith, but rather supplements faith, spirituality, life, and the living. We must continue to teach and practice our core principles in everyday life. It is expected that those who have an intelligent understanding of the history and purpose of Freemasonry will seek to educate others in the same intelligent way. An uninstructed, uneducated Mason is not a benefit of the craft. We each have our right to practice and profess in our own way, but yet be accepted as equals under the eyes of God and man both. And I believe that although Freemasons, we must and should always be respectful and obedient in the particular to the laws of the country in which you belong. I also believe there is an understanding that we as Freemasons also have an obligation to stand up and speak out against those who wish to deprive others of their individual rights and freedoms, of which every Freemason enjoys in the lodge. I believe that many of these leaders spoken here and many, many more felt and sought that burning desire to stand up and speak out when an injustice had been committed. It's incumbent on all Freemasons to always protect and defend those inalienable rights. And when they are threatened, then you must, and I say again, you must rise up and meet those oppressors head on. And if by chance they happen to be a Freemason, then to remind them of their obligation and oaths, which we also and received, binding ourselves to each other, our fraternity, before God. Freemasons have historically fought against racism and equality, embracing every culture and every race as we have one of the most diverse fraternities in the world. It's our basic principle teaching of our craft that we are equals amongst ourselves and are well known for our tolerance, prudence, and understanding. Compassion allows many to realize our role in this world. It enables us to forget our selfish desires to assist in bettering the lives of others less fortunate than us. Many Freemasons were defenders of social justice, founding and supporting a host of organizations in their quest to break down the barriers of bigotry and racism, and not just in America, but all around the world. Freemasonry inspired many revolutions around the world. Many of those leaders were in fact members of the craft, influenced by the ideological Masonic teachings, which embodied equality among the brethren in the lodge. So I leave it up to you to always do what is right, to do what is good and share it with the world. That is the greatest gift and core value our fraternity has to offer to mankind and humanity. May God bless all of you. May God bless the United States of America. May God bless all our veterans, past and present, all our first responders, and our healthcare workers. Because it is by their sacrifice that we meet here today as a free people and Freemasons. And most especially, may God continue to shine his blessings on the greatest fraternity in the world, Freemasonry. Thank you, brother. I think everybody, Jim, I think you're still muted. You can go ahead and unmute everybody if you want.
There we go. I think it's just fantastic that we can have men of such quality as members of our fraternity to share their thoughts with us. Chris, I understand that you're looking into Freemasonry. I'd like to have number one, I'd like to have your thoughts on the presentation, and number two, do you have a question for Moses? So go ahead and unmute your mic.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, Brother Chris, I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, I thought everything that you said was...
Oh, now you muted yourself again.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, there you go.
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I thought everything that you said was right on the money about where we need to go, not only as I look to join this brotherhood, but also, the brotherhood of man across our country. We're sorely missing in some of these principles right now, and it's showing up and it's causing chasms and divisions throughout our country. It's very disheartening as a veteran.
Yes, it is. And, there was a brother Mason who posted a post. I'm not going to get into who it was or where he did it, but he kind of made a post about that Freemasons shouldn't be involved, that the fraternity should keep quiet, it should keep silent. And I've always been looking, I'm a historian, and I see things from a historical point of view, and I've seen what Freemasonry has done behind the door, closed doors, and sometimes in order to safeguard themselves from danger and out in public view. And I believe that it is our inherent right as Freemasons to stand up when you see something wrong. To stand up, speak out. It doesn't mean you have to go out there and go crazy and burn things down or protest, but a simple, one simple step can change. Those brethren in South Africa took one small step. That small step eventually probably led to the abolishing of apartheid. So again, if they didn't take that step, if many of these Freemasons didn't do what they did, I'm not saying that slavery wouldn't be here today, that it would eventually would have been eradicated, but how many people benefited? How many people were rushed across or hustled across or freed from the South because of the direct connections of what Freemasons did and how they used the craft, how they used their modes of communication, how they used and created organizations and orders based off of Freemasonry because it worked here. And I've always said that if it works in the Masonic Lodge, it should work around the world. There's very few organizations in the world that allow men to meet the way we do. Now, our organization is, I would say, a perfect organization. It's a great organization. Unfortunately, sometimes we have men in there that are not perfect and choose to do the wrong thing. Like every other organization in the world, every other occupation in the world, we have good and bad. We have good soldiers, good police officers, bad police officers. I see it in my job. I've been on 32 years. I've seen it in my own eyes. So everywhere you go, you got good and bad. But that doesn't diminish the fact that Freemasonry is still an incredible organization that has done incredible things. And sometimes I see that we promote and we advocate to bring men in, and we never use these tools. We never use our history, our real history. And when you watch all the histories on TV, the History Channel, they always speak about all these Masonic, sitcoms or TV shows. It's either Chris Hodop or Brent Morris or two of the Hoyos, but it's always about secrecy, conspiracy, running the world. And sometimes I think we do ourselves an injustice by associating and thinking that's all we're about, right or wrong, instead of maybe telling people what we have done and how even during across battle lines, how men were able to put their differences aside and help that fellow human, that fellow soldier across the other side, whether it be in a Confederate a Union or a Confederate, whether it be War of 1812 or World War II or any war. That's the beauties of Freemasonry, and we never seem to promote that. We never seem to, we have a big promotion now, not just a man and Mason, but we never talk about really the fundamental things that we have done and who we are. And I believe that is an attraction, and especially now, if the men and young men can see our history, what we've really done. We have a brother right here who was on marches, who fought for the civil rights, who was right there, could have been stoned, beat, killed, right here in front of us. And it's a shame that we don't advocate that. That's what we should be speaking about. Not who landed on the moon and who how many times John Wayne was a Freemason, but these are the stories that we should really be focusing on and sharing with the world. And maybe they'll take a less view of us being conspiracists instead of saying, wow, these individuals, look what they've done. Look who they really are. Maybe it's worthwhile joining, investigating, maybe asking. And I think we do a disservice to ourselves by closing those doors on ourselves. But the more you read and the more you see history, which I do, and I see the beauties that we have done, it's just amazing that we don't talk more about it.
Moses makes a good point. In many ways, we've allowed ourselves to be defined by fiction. I mean, what's the most popular Masonic book out there? National Treasure. Yeah. And it has nothing to do with Freemasonry. Yeah. When in fact, when you look at somebody like William Upton as an example, that's far more interesting. Far more interesting. When you listen to a presentation like this, it's far more interesting than the fiction. Fiction's nice, but it always fascinates me how we allow ourselves to be defined by that. David Colbeth, I saw you move your microphone.
Sorry, no, it's a habit to put it in front of my face.
But actually, I tell you what, the last time I spoke for you guys here, you guys told me the story of Upton, which I never knew. And it's amazing that those beautiful stories should be told because, believe it or not, people assume today that Connecticut was the first one in 1980 to officially grant recognition to Prince Hall from a mainstream Grand Lodge. And again, if you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat it. And if you don't write your history or speak about your history, someone else is going to do it for you. And guess what? Connecticut brags they're the first. Because nobody knows really outside of Washington what Washington did and what they did in 1898. And that your Grand Master went to his grave saying, don't ever mark my grave until we're all equal. And however long that takes, don't do it. And that's us. That's the story of us. That's who we are. And that's what we should be talking about. And I had a conversation with a brother from Connecticut. He swore that they were the first. I'm like, no, well, you weren't the first. It was Washington. And listen, I didn't know either. I thought Connecticut was the first. And guess what? I was corrected. And again, we're defined by what the media and the world perceives us as. And that's such a shame because we have done so much good for humanity around the world. And it's sad that that's how we looked at. And sometimes it's our own fault because when you hear these individuals talk, they never talk about anything else. They always try to disprove and say, no, we're not. We're not conspiracists. We're not ruling the world. But they don't talk about who we really are and what we've done. And maybe that might sway some mind. I mean, it can't do us any worse than what we are now.
And it's, and along the same lines, and this is kind of parallel to most, we talked about Upton. There's another past Grand Master a lot of people don't know about, Bill Paul Horn, and it's real simple. You want to see a monument of Bill Paul Horn in Washington? Look at any accessibility ramp on any street. Those accessibility ramps were because of him. If you look at building accessibility, that happened because of him. So again, parallel, I get it. It's parallel to what, Moses was talking primarily about African American civil rights and the civil rights movement in general. Bill Horn focused on the civil rights of disabled individuals. And again, a story that a lot of people don't know. That again, if you see an accessibility route, that's us, and that's something it's a story that we don't tell. So, David, again, the mic is there, so I'm giving you an opportunity.
we were just chatting with the Grandmaster last night on a recording for shows that'll be coming out in a couple of weeks, and I didn't realize we were asking him about how he became a Mason and how he got involved, and he was talking about his forum that he had, and also the forums we've been having like this, and also over in Manita Lodge in Eastern Washington. That was a great meetup there, and he said he didn't become a Mason until Prince Hall was recognized. That was one of his. He was a DMLA, and same thing. Most Worshipful Jim was the same idea. So it's interesting. You don't know about those things until you talk to somebody about it and learn about their history and about their past. And I didn't know that so many movements, if you will, in general, were centered. Of course, you think about Masonry as being, and Masons being involved in central in things that happened in the past, but I didn't realize that lodges and Masons were as central in those kind of things. And how appropriate is it that Most Worshipful Russ Charbonnier was talking about civility and having the lodges and the Masons become the catalyst for this new generation, if you will, of civility, and using the lodge buildings as the focal point to bring in community members. And so it's kind of full circle, right? 50 years later, or 100 years later, or 200 years later, depending on which cycle we're in.
Yeah, it's a shame. And I try to, that's why all my lectures are open. I try not to just keep it to Masons alone. I want the public to see what we do. I want them to hear it. I want them to see that we have made effective change. And many, Medgar Evers died. He was shot in the back. And there's no doubt about it that the man that shot him knew he was a Freemason, because he was a very active, predominant Freemason. He was in many parades, many marches. So for Byron Dillon Buffer not to know it, and who was a Brother Mason himself, again, we see a Brother Mason doing wrong, not the craft, but he chose to do wrong. And many have chosen to do wrong throughout history. But that's not the point. Is that, again, these individuals should be spoken about, should be brought about, and to see that many of these individuals were putting their lives on the line. Things could have got ugly when Gene was marching across that bridge. Things could have got ugly. He could have been one hit over the head with a club or a bat, and that would have been it. You don't know. You're putting yourself in harm's way, and many have done that. Even across battle lines, when you try to go across the battle line to help another fallen soldier who's a Brother Mason, you're taking a chance. You could get captured. You could be shot. What does that other soldier know who's not a Mason? All he knows is you're a Union man coming across the lines. But yet, these are stories that people need to hear and really emphasize on that, and to who we are. And that's the beauty. That's what, when I hear these stories, I just enjoy it. It just makes me more prouder and to be part of this organization that for centuries has been doing this. And we go back. I'm currently writing 2 books on these 2 subjects, but I can fill volumes of the stories of what men have done with each other, even across lines, how they've put their differences aside for that moment to render help, to render aid, to render care, or, like I said, during the underground movement, many put their lives at risk. John Brown was hung for it. He was adamant that he was going to die, he was going to keep fighting or die trying, and he died. He paid the ultimate price. So many did. Many lost that battle and lost that fight. And so we should talk more about that, and that should be what we emphasize on. And not that someone landed on the moon, or again, sometimes we like to have the poster child, because the more famous people we have, it's kind of like vilifies. It's almost like puts a stamp of approval. And I don't want that. I want to show the world the individuals, the average day individuals that did these wonderful deeds and that were willing to put themselves in line. They weren't presidents, they weren't astronauts, but they're just everyday individuals, just like Grandmaster Upton, who decided to take a stand. And that small stand, those individuals in South Africa, they weren't presidents, they weren't famous world leaders or revolutionists. They were just ordinary, simple men who decided to take a stand on their own to effect small change. And that small change is like dropping a rock in a pebble in a water. The ripples slowly head outwards, and eventually you hopefully create the tsunami that's going to eradicate and wipe out that bad. But it's sad that we don't take more advantage of that.
So,
Well, I
so,
think
so,
we do.
so Moses, you've pointed Gene out a couple of times. You know, I see you up there, sir, and I'd love for you to unmute your mic and tell us your story. Now let's get him unmuted first. Looks like, yeah, you're gonna have to unmute.
Even if you ask him, Jim, he has to accept.
Okay, let me
I think.
see.
There
There he
you
is.
go.
I'm unmuted.
Okay, there you are.
Well, I'm very proud of Moises. When he first got into Masonry, I was worshipful master of my mother lodge, and Moises and Brother Yatim were at almost every one of my meetings, to the extent that I asked him, "Why are you guys always here? Not that I don't want you here, but why are you always here?" And he said to me, "Because you've always got something going on." And I think that's one of the problems we have with present day Masonry. We don't always have something going on, so nobody wants to come out. I visited a lodge here in Oregon, and the entire meeting was taken up with the reading of the bills and the minutes, and then everybody went home. Nobody wants to do that. I'd rather watch television. And I think that's how most people feel. If you have the time, take a look at freemasonsblog.com and see what I suggest for various meetings. The first issue is online now. There'll be more coming in the future. Okay, to get back to a couple of things. Yes, I marched with Dr. King. I was afraid, but I did it. And I was proud of what became after we marched. We were able to sit in any part of the bus that we wanted. And what was more important to me is I could eat in any restaurant I wanted to eat in, and I could stay in any hotel that I wanted to stay in. I'm mixed race. I am white, Native American, and black, which in the United States meant that I was black, and I was denied many privileges. My wife is white. It wasn't until 1970 that marriages of black people and white people were legal. I couldn't even have married the woman I love. Another thing I want to mention, I come from an illustrious family. My grandfather's brother was the Grand Master of the Prince Hall Masons in New Jersey in 1898. I was going to join the Prince Hall Lodge. Had many friends that belonged to the lodge in the town in which I lived. And at the same time, I was doing my genealogical research and found out that my grandfather had been a member of a lodge called Alpha Lodge in Newark, New Jersey. I researched Alpha Lodge and found out it was the first lodge under a regular Grand Lodge that admitted black men. So I joined Alpha Lodge. As I mentioned, in 1987, I was the worshipful master of Alpha Lodge. And at that time, all of the members were black. In 1986, I joined Cincinnati Lodge in my hometown of Morristown, New Jersey, and I became the junior warden. In 1989, I became the worshipful master of Cincinnati Lodge. As far as I know, I'm the only person to be worshipful master of an all-black lodge and of an all-white lodge. One other thing I'd like to mention about New Jersey Masonry. When I came into Alpha Lodge, members of Alpha Lodge were always blackballed when they tried to join the Scottish Rite or the Commandery. I was junior deacon of Alpha Lodge in 1985. And in 1985, I went before the Grand Lodge Communication and told them that they call me brother, but they don't treat me like a brother. I can't join the appendant bodies. And I told them at the end that I had more respect for members of the Ku Klux Klan than I did for New Jersey Masons, because I expect certain behavior from the Klan, but not from the Masons. And after that, in 1986, the Scottish Rite and the Commandery integrated. In 1987, with the assistance of the Grand Master, the Shrine integrated. So now in New Jersey, a person of color can join anybody. And I think that's great.
Okay, I'm wow.
Yeah, talk about expectations, right?
David, thank you for inviting me.
Gene, thank you for sharing that. My God. With that, I got nothing.
I'd like to thank Brother Dave for inviting me.
Oh,
You're
God,
very,
yes.
very welcome, Gene. I was kind of, we were talking with Moises before the show started, and I said, I think Gene was going to try and join us. I thought maybe I'll ping him, and sure enough, I'm so glad you're able to pop in here.
Thank you. I've been recovering from sepsis, and it's taken me a while to get back on my feet. I'm on my feet enough to sit on my butt and listen to Moises.
Well, you look pretty good. So if you're normally even better, then you're very handsome.
I am. That's true.
Oh,
Well,
I'm floored.
right, Worshipful Gomez.
Yes, brother.
Hey, buddy with the Vietnam hat.
Yes.
I was in July.
Pardon?
I was in July.
Yeah. Well, I was a little bit all over.
My whole outfit got killed. I'm the only survivor.
Uh-oh.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Well, those are other stories. But no, I became aware of Prince Hall Masons when I had a friend of mine at Fort Meade, Maryland, that he joined them.
Oh, yeah.
And I went across this little street that we had between our houses and got to talking to him. Ended up that we both got assigned down in Panama, him to one unit, me to another one. And lo and behold, in Panama, the Boy Scout troop that I had was sponsored by Prince Hall.
Wow.
Yeah. Your talk tonight has enlightened me even more so. And I look forward to digging into more and more in history. History has always made me want to go and learn more. And I love the history of the United States and of the world. You said something earlier tonight about, did you come from Cuba?
No, my older brother was born in Cuba, and I was born here.
Well, I was down there in Florida during the Cuban crisis. I was part of that.
Cuba Missile, yep, in 61 by the Bay of Pigs as well.
Yes. And in fact, at one point, we all bent over and kissed our butts goodbye because the bell went off and we launched 15,000 foot of runway of aircraft fully loaded. And they were headed for Cuba, which was only 90 miles away. But anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry.
That was some dark, close 24 hours back then.
Yes, yes. Anyway, all of that has made me want to learn more and more. And I'm even prouder of our state in that we stuck our foot out there at one point and we got slapped for it. But now we're charging forward even more so with it. And that is the blacks and the whites are meeting together. And Terrestrial Lodge, which I was a member of until its demise, we did have a black gentleman in the lodge that he did become worshipful master. And if memory serves me correctly, he joined a Prince Hall Lodge in Olympia, and he became the master there as well. So, and that's been more recent than yours, Gene, but
Yeah, he might have tied me.
and I think he even became the illustrious potentate of the Black Shrine down there. But I'm interested in any books that you could maybe put on the website for us that we might be able to go and learn even more so, because you've really wet my whistle tonight.
Well,
Moises has inspired me to do a Zoom meeting on the history of Alpha Lodge.
there you go. Listen, if I inspired you, that's a great honor.
That's a big plus.
You've been inspiring me for a long time, brother.
But yeah, brother, unfortunately, there's not much written. That's why I'm trying to write the two books, because there's not much written in a book form on the Underground Railroad or civil rights struggles, all that with Freemasonry. It's really not much been touched on, not much been spoken about. I research the Smithsonian, I research all kinds of different organizations, and sometimes I just find stuff from talking. People will tell me a story, and then I say, "Oh, that's very interesting. Let me see where that takes me." And I'm able to open up all the doors. And I was supposed to speak in South Africa this year, and that's how I found out about that, because the brother was telling me the story of how they integrated South Africa. I'm like, wait a minute, I never heard that. And doing apartheid, they did that? Really? And they got away with it? And they weren't killed or banned or anything? And he said, yeah, they did it. They managed to defy all the laws and rules, and they're still doing it to this day. So that's why we're always learning, and I enjoy these
Brother moderator, can I have another 3 minutes?
You can have as much time as you want.
Okay. Slavery didn't end in New Jersey, my home state, until 1874. Pardon me, 1854. And Alpha Lodge, no, I was right the first time, 1874. After the Emancipation Proclamation only freed slaves that were in the Confederate States. So slavery still went on in the North. Alpha Lodge was founded in 1871. And Moises, they had a house in Newark that was on the Underground Railroad that
That's
was
correct.
run by members of Alpha Lodge.
That's correct. That's correct.
I tried to pass that information to you. Maybe you got it.
No, but thank you, my brother. I did know that. Some of the brethren in your lodge told me that. I'm trying to locate the address, although I'm almost certain that the building no longer exists. They have the address of the location, but I don't think the building exists anymore. Right.
I'm just Florida. I'm good enough.
But again, even in New Jersey, when we voted to ratify the 13th Amendment, New Jersey didn't vote right away. I mean, and to defend some of the southern states, some of the northern states didn't want it. Delaware didn't vote until 1901, didn't ratify it. New Jersey didn't ratify it until a year and a half later. So sadly enough, now it didn't mean that you were still allowed to have slaves. I mean, legally, the federal law banned it. But again, there was some state, Texas didn't do it until 1870. Mississippi didn't change until 2013. 2013, they actually ratified the 13th Amendment. So it's amazing. Now, they didn't mean they could have slaves, but they just didn't agree with it. And it was finally read and ratified in February of 2013, 7 years ago. So 7 years ago, the last state capitulated.
None of my New Jersey family were ever enslaved. Most were self-employed.
Ryan Leonard, I saw your hand go up.
Never worked for somebody.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that both Moises and Gene, thank you both for taking time this evening to put on this presentation. Moises, I thought you hit it right on the head when you said if we ought to be doing a better job of telling the narrative, what we have done, and not so much on the fiction. I think you nailed it right on the head.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate that.
We're very fortunate to have 3 new district deputies on our this evening. Ryan is a new district deputy, and I understand you just finally received your badge of honor, your jewel.
No, he's an old school deputy.
Oh, is he? I apologize.
Yeah, I'm a has-been.
I thought maybe it was the passing of it. I apologize. I always thought you were receiving it, but I know Very Worshipful Kurt and Very Worshipful Don are new deputies, brand new, minted.
Well, congratulations, brother.
Yeah, Dave, I'm the new Grand Bible Bearer. So.
Bible Bearer. I'm sorry. I apologize.
That's quite all right.
So I just got to find out, Moses, if you, let's say you get elected the first time out. I don't know how things work in your Grand Lodge. When is your projected installation as Grand Master?
Well, right now, our annual installation is in April. It's been like that for a long time, but because of the pandemic, we had to suspend it and move it to November. So this November, we're going to have our annual installation. The Grand Master's holding on. It's going to stay on. Everybody's staying on until November. At that November meeting, we're going to put on legislation to change the annual installation from April to November going forward, which we've been trying to do for many years. It's never passed. If it passes, then going forward, every year our installation will be in November. That's when we change a new Grand Master.
Jim's asking because you're going to have about 9 people who are going to be making the trip out to
Few more than
congratulate
9.
you.
Few more than 9.
There's
I
9
get a
here.
ride with you.
We just need to circle the day. That's all. We just got to.
It would probably be the week before Thanksgiving of 2022. That's when the election happens. It's one time, one election, and that's it.
But that's
right
for
now.
That's for junior.
Running.
That's for junior, though, right?
Junior, right? In New Jersey, you campaign or you solicit for the junior Grand Warden. If you win the junior Grand Warden, it's an automatic progression to the east. So I don't have to.
So it'd be 2025, you said, for Grand Master?
So November 2025, I would be installed as Grand Master. And in November of 26 would be my year, my outgoing year, my session. But I would be officially installed in November of 2022, 2025, if the brethren choose to elect. Right now, I'm the only one running, so hopefully it stays that way.
Work for Gregory Scott.
I've got chats coming up here that people are saying they're putting it in their calendar. That's awesome. So
I think in chartered plane maybe sounds good.
There you go. So it's 11:30 right now in New Jersey time. So I just want to make sure. Does anybody have any final questions or comments for Mo? David.
I just want to point out again that we've got past Grand Masters, Right Worshipful Sirs, Grand Bible Bearers, Very Worshipful Has-Beens, Worshipful Masters, and 2 inquirers as well. Dan Sutter's just joined us, and he's also an inquirer along with Chris for King Solomon Lodge in Auburn. So wanted to say hello to Dan and let him know that we appreciate him attending, and Chris as well.
And Dave, if you wanted to do that podcast with me in the future in July or August, let me know a date as soon as you can, and I'll block it in. I'll be available.
Absolutely. I think our next recording is the 19th, but we're going to have immediate past Grand Master of British Columbia and Yukon on for recording, and then but we'll get you in there. I promise. We've got so many great people.
Also, if you want.
So before I turn things over to the deputy for the final word, on behalf of the Worship Master of my home lodge, Frank S. Land 313, I want to let you know what's happening on Wednesday. We're starting a special series called Leading in Pandemic Times. And it's going to be a 4-part series that's going to go through the entire month of July every Wednesday. And our speakers are going to be our youth leaders. So the first one, which is this Wednesday, will feature the current state master counselor of Washington, D. Kenneth Copeland, and of course the junior past state master counselor, Colton Jenkins. Now, as a teaser, and I'm going to drop some on my worshipful master next week, which would be the 15th. Yes, will be Job's daughters, and the presenter will be Tori Hesner.
Oh my God. That's my granddaughter.
Tori will be the junior past Miss Washington, Job's daughters, so she'll be speaking. After that, on the 22nd, will be the current Miss International Job's daughter, Maya Garcia. And then after that, on the 29th, we will have Arya Freewalt, the current Grand Worthy Associate Advisor of Washington, Idaho Rainbow. So we're going to have the kids come and talk to us about leading pandemic times. We can learn a lot from them because many of the things we're doing today are lessons they taught us. So being led by the future. So, Worship Master, I hope you enjoyed that little surprise. The other thing has to do with the next run of Zoom meetings. We're going to give Moses a break for a while from us. But you're welcome to join us in the next next week. Kurt Gatso will be joining us by popular demand. Be talking to us about identity theft and protection. The following week will be James Nero from Tacoma Scottish Rite talking to us about the esoterica curriculum that's offered by the Scottish Rite. Following that will be Daniel Yatta from the Grand Lodge of Rhode Island, past master of King Hiram Lodge in Provincetown, telling us a little bit about the jewels that they were able to obtain by one Paul Revere.
Yeah.
So kind of a fun thing if people are interested in that kind of history. After that will be Sean Iyer from the George Washington National Masonic Memorial. And then, because our Lodge Leaders Retreat got canceled, the speaker after that, Barry Birch from the Grand Lodge of BC and Yukon. So, as you can see, Barry Worshipful Sir up there in the corner, I'm trying to line him up for you. I'm trying to line him up for you the best I can.
Thank you very much, Most Worshipful. I greatly appreciate that. You're making my job a whole lot easier by lining all these wonderful educational things. I was going to pick your brain anyway to help me put together these educational
See, Mo, this is what happens when you become a has-been. You fail miserably at it, okay? Literally, you fail miserably at it.
Please make sure you send me those links.
I'll be happy to.
Definitely join.
I'll be happy to. Those are going to be fun times. Any event, very much for the Don. Okay, David, you had something?
Before we give the last word, I actually was fortunate to speak to a very worshipful Bud Cook on the phone just before our call tonight, and he's doing very well. He's about 60 to 70% returned. His speech is a little bit slow. He didn't have a stroke, but it was an infection actually that caused him to lose some of that. But they figure with medications and time, he should be able to come back about 90%. And so he's over at a care center in Des Moines, just north of Kent Des Moines Road at the Stafford Healthcare there in Des Moines. So he sounded pretty good, in pretty good spirits. He laughed a few times, and so we had a good conversation about 45 minutes or so.
Great.
So with that, I'll give the last word to. Actually, before I do that,
can I say something real quick?
Sure, Dan, absolutely.
I would like to thank you all for the privilege of inviting me to this meeting.
Absolutely, I'm glad you came.
Our pleasure.
This is while we can't meet in the traditional sense, we can meet this way and learn a couple of things along the way. So actually, before I turn it over to Don, Right Worshipful Sir, do you have any final words?
I think he doesn't realize he's the only one.
Moses, do you have anything? You have any final words you wish to share with us?
Just thank you once again for being allowing me to share a little bit of history and story with you. And all, it's always a pleasure being there. I can hopefully when this all passes, we can meet in fellowship again. But thank you all for the opportunity.
That would be nice. We'd enjoy that a lot. Very worshipful by the district deputy, the current one, the one from 13. Sorry, 10. You get all next week, okay? Next week is all about you. I gotta turn it over to the boss.
Well, I wouldn't say I'm the boss, but I bring you greetings from Most Worshipful Chris Kaufman, our Grand Master of Most Worshipful Grand Lodge of Free and Accepted Masons of Washington. I got to tell you, he's been very, very quiet recently. The only couple of important things, King Solomon Lodge has completed their carpeting, and it really looks good. I've been watching that. I want to say that I have the Grand Master's coins. I've got about 15 or 20 of them, so they're $10 a piece. And the Grand Master's pins, I've got them available too, so feel free to hit me up for them. Let's see, what else do I need to know? Oh, there are many, many different Zoom meetings going on. I must attend about 8 or 9 of them a week. The Jobies are having Zoom meetings, 45, 78. Haven't gotten any from 75 yet, but I'm sure I will in the very near future, because I'm been assigned to the Fraternal Relations Committee of Job's Daughters International, from Washington. And I'll be happy for anyone who wishes to attend the Bethel Zoom meeting. Send me an email and I'll be most happy to send you the connection for the youth groups. They're very, very active. We've got one young lady at Bethel 45 who's someday, I anticipate, she's going to be Miss Washington, Job's Daughters. I really believe she's a real go-getter. She's only 14 years old and just doing phenomenal. I want to thank you all, especially you, Most Worshipful Jim, for putting together these Zoom meetings. It's really phenomenal to be able to attend these. And thank you very much, Most Right Worshipful Moses, for your education that you've been passing along to all of us. With that, I will jump out of here and turn it back over to Most Worshipful Jim and let him close out things.
Well, if you got a glass, let's raise it. And give me just a second. I need to quote something here. This is important that I quote this one, because it kind of falls in line with the fact that we're doing all these Zoom meetings and everything else like that.
We weren't laughing at you, Jim. We were laughing at Chris's crushed. He crushed his glass already.
Oh, okay. Sorry. In any event, normally at 9 o'clock, what happens is we toast to absent brethren. So in that spirit, allow me to expand the definition of absent to include you, my brethren, because I've missed you. Yet, from this perspective, I have witnessed your generous spirit, your thoughtful and caring embrace as you have continued to provide succor to your communities and to one another. You have demonstrated by your actions and deeds that Masonry is in fact a verb, an action word. You are not complacent with merely reciting ritual or parroting scripture, but living his words every day, all day. I'm so honored that you call me brother. So tonight, glass raised to you, and wish for you love and laughter, health and happiness, now and always, until we meet again.
You're here.
You're here.
You're here.
Some more to be.
Brethren, thank you so very much. We've got this recorded, and it takes a little bit for it to come back over from Zoom from the Zoom cloud over to me. Once that gets done, David, I'm going to send the link to you so that way you can put it up on the District 13 YouTube channel.
Perfect. I'll get her done.
All righty. Thank you much, brethren. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Most
Good evening,
Worshipful.
brother.
Oh, again, thank you so much.
My pleasure,
Thanks,
brother.
brethren.
Bye-bye now.
Dean, good seeing you.
Good night.